So today we are going to talk about planetary movements in 2021. The planets are always constantly in motion, right? But we are just going to look at January through June, or to the end of June, because let me minimize this over here. This logistics. I had to actually go through each and every day of the 6 months to record those movements. And just a brief introduction on myself. I know many of you, but some of you don't know me. I'm Umesh Dudaney. I live in San Francisco Bay Area. I've been a student of Jyotish for more than about 25 years now. Um, and that's my website, astrovedic108.com. Now you notice I said I'm a student because I still feel that even if I spend each and every minute of the rest of my life studying Jyotish, it would still be uh, I still wouldn't. It's such a deep science and such a wide science that even Maharishi Parasha, who basically uh, was a sage who through which this Vedic astrology came, and who had so much knowledge and so much wisdom that his knowledge is still being revealed today. And he did that without any instruments or anything like that. And it was such a deep knowledge. He compared his knowledge to standing in front of an ocean with some water in his palm. And his knowledge was the water that he was holding in his palm compared to the wide ocean that was there in front of him, which was the Jyotish basically. So yeah, so I think approaching this with humility and an open mind is so important. Now, is everybody able to see my? Why does it say resume share? Hold on, I'm just trying to get this thing. Okay, so let's get started with some Ganesh mantras and Guru mantra. So just like last time, we basically welcome to join. We'll say the Ganesh mantra 3 times and the Guru mantra 12 times. Okay. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gurave 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 Namaha. Okay. By the way, thanks to Ganga who put this beautiful graphic together of Ganesh. So, yeah, I'm not sure why I'm. Okay. So the topics that we're going to cover, I'll just spend a few minutes on providing some background and context. Then we will look at the year 2021, the first 6 months, month by month, look at the important transits. As I said, the planets are always in motion, but we will just pick some of the important ones. And then we will conclude with some closing comments. So look at some transits, conjunctions, eclipses uh, from January through June. It's important to get familiar with the planets and their movements. Why? Because they have such a deep and important influence on our day-to-day lives. We may not realize it, but they actually do have a profound influence on our day-to-day lives. So it's important at least to get some kind of familiarity with them and their movements. And that is just also not only, it's also an acknowledgement of the influence that they have, and it's a sign of reverence to the planets also. So these are just dates, time frames as the planet moves across the heavens. So they are not actual predictions by any means. So just because a planet changes one sign to another, that doesn't necessarily mean that something is going to happen on that particular day. So I just want to set that as a context. There are lots of different things that go into when events happen in our lives, and I'll briefly touch what those things are. But the transits are like one of the three important components in Jyotish. So these transits basically affect our lives differently depending on our own individual charts. In some cases, there may not be an effect at all. In some other cases, there may be a much bigger effect. So, for example, if a planet, say Mars, is going into Taurus, that same Mars in Taurus will have different effects for different people in different areas of their life. Okay? So, for some people, Mars may be the seventh house. So, Mars will play an important role in relationships during that time. For others, Mars may be their 10th house. And this is based on their natal chart. This is based on when they were born, the time they were born, and the place they were born. So in the case of the 10th house, the effects would be in the area of career and so on. So we see how the same planet in the same sign has different effects for different people. And it's not necessary that the effect happens on the day that a planet changes a sign, because that also depends on the interaction that the planet has on the natal chart, on the planets in our natal chart. So if somebody has a moon in Taurus and somebody else doesn't, then the person with the moon will experience more effects than the person who does not have any planets in that particular sign. And also, uh, even though some planet enters a sign on a particular day, that's like 0 degrees of that sign. But somebody may be having a planet, say, at 24 degrees of that sign. So the effect will not materialize as the planet that's transiting gets closer to the natal planet. That's when the person starts experiencing the effect. But at the same time, I must say that even though the planets change sign, there could be some subtle changes that happen that we may not necessarily recognize right at the beginning. So it's important to know when the planets are changing signs, so at least we can recognize those from a subtle level, and they get stronger depending on our individual charts. So that I think we covered that. The effects may or may not appear on those same dates. In fact, most likely they will probably not. But at a subtle level, the changes start happening. So the major components of Jyotish, I've tried to simplify Jyotish into two major aspects. One is the static aspect, and the other one is the dynamic aspect. And these two aspects go into when events actually happen in our lives. So now, what are the static and dynamic aspects? So the static is the natal birth chart. That is the chart of the time that we were born. That's a snapshot of the heavens of where the planets were at the time and date and the place that we were born. And those planets are not going to be in the same place exactly as our natal chart, because they're constantly moving. And our natal chart does not change; it's fixed forever, right? So that is the static component. Now, the dynamic component has two things in it. One is the dashas, or the planetary periods. This is which planet is or planetary period we are in right now. That again is derived and calculated from the natal chart. And I think we covered that in our last talk. And the other one is the transits, the actual movement of planets in the sky, which is what we are looking at today. So as we can see, this is just one of the three components. So that's why we have to keep this in context. And there's an interplay between these different components. Okay? There's a connection happening. So as the planets in the transiting are moving, they are interacting with the planets in our natal chart based on their positions. And again, that's going to be different for different people. And for events to occur in a life, there has to be a confluence across all these major indicators. Okay? So if there is a confluence of more than one, then there's a good chance that an event will occur. But if there's a confluence in all three, that all three things are pointing to the same thing, then there's a very high likelihood that that event occurs. So the natal chart shows the promise, okay, a promise of anything. And the dashas and the transits show the timing or the fructification of the promise, or when that promise will come to materialize in our life. Okay. And then we are only looking at some of the transits for 2021 today. Okay, let's get started here. So let's look at January. And I just want to make a point that overriding all of this is the divine Leela. This is the divine play, and that overrides everything. So, okay, so let's go through this quickly. Venus has already entered Sagittarius a couple of days ago. Mercury has entered Capricorn. And on January 10th, Moon is in Gandanta. Now, what is Gandanta? And one thing before we go into that, you will see that there's a lot of emphasis in here on the moon sign, on the moon, basically, on the position of the moon and the transits of the moon. And why is that? Because the moon is what governs our mind. We experience the world through our mind, and the moon has the biggest influence on it. Moon also is the fastest moving planet. So that would explain why our mind changes so quickly. One day we could be happy, the other day we could be sad, and so on and so forth. And that a lot of it has also to do with the position of the moon. So I've tried to highlight over here some of the dates where the moon can be in challenging position, and some of the dates where it is in a happy position. So this way, you can start looking to see if there's a connection or not between the placement between the moon and the mind. See, two people could look at the same thing quite differently. Somebody may look at it as a glass half empty. Somebody looks at the same glass as half full. Why is that? I mean, they're looking at exactly the same thing. It's because of the different minds and the influence of the moon, of their horoscope, and on the mind also. So now, what is moon in Gandanta? Gandanta is, there are three places in the zodiac where there's a transition that happens between a water sign and a fire sign. So we have Aries as the fire, Taurus as the earth, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water. So the 12 signs. So I'm not going to go into the different signs because I think we covered that the last time. But there are three places in the zodiac where the transition happens between water and fire. And those places are between Pisces and Aries, between Cancer and Leo, Cancer being the water sign, Leo being the fire sign, and between Scorpio and Sagittarius. Scorpio, again, the water sign, and Sagittarius, the fire sign. So what we look at, the Gandanta points are not are the transition points. So we look at the last 3 degrees of the water sign and the first 3 degrees of the fire sign. So those 6 degrees are what is called as Gandanta. And what happens when a planet goes into Gandanta is that it takes a while. Just imagine going from water to fire. It takes a while to get used to the new thing, right? So there is kind of an unsettled feeling, and the planet almost feels like it's drowning or something, So it does not give good results. So this may not be as important for other planets because they're quite slowly moving. So it's not that they're in Gandanta quite often, but the moon is, because the moon moves around the zodiac in about 27 days or so. So when we say there are 3 points in the zodiac, so like every 9 days, the moon goes into Gandanta at different places in the zodiac. So that's why there can be a tendency to feel kind of unsettled during that time. And this may not be as much of a problem for the tri yogis who've been doing tri yoga for a long time, and that's would be a good remedy for that. But for people who are there in your life and who may not be as emotionally grounded, you may see the differences, between your friends and family and so on. In fact, there was one person that I knew. She was in a relationship with a man who was kind of not emotionally grounded, but also he was actually bipolar, and but she did not know, and she was basically telling me that it is like every so often he just suddenly goes off the rails, and without for no rhyme or reason, and she's not able to know why that's the case and what to do about it. So I just mentioned to her, okay, I said, see if there is a relationship when the moon goes into Gandanta and whether this thing happens. And sure enough, in a few weeks she recognized it, and it was like clockwork. It was like every 9 or 10 days this thing would happen, but now she was prepared for it, and she was better able to navigate it. So that's why knowing this and having this awareness can help us in our own day-to-day lives. And that was one example. I've seen this to be the case in other examples also. So you may just want to see if there is any relationship between moon and Gandanta and how you feel. And actually, it could be different for the different, it may not be the same for all the three Gandanta points. And for different people, it might be different points that may affect a little bit more. So, but it'd be good to just notice that. And I put the dates over here for the next 6 months. All right. In January 21st, Moon Mars conjunction in Aries. So then we have to look at the nature of the planets. So Mars, we know, is heat, is fire, is anger. Moon is our mind. So there could be a tendency for us to experience those qualities on that particular day. Say. So just a heads up. And this is not necessarily that it is absolutely going to happen. These are just tendencies to be aware of, because a lot also depends. As I said, all the planets are constantly moving. There's an interplay between all the different planets. So at one point in time, it might be it might have more of an impact, but next month it may not have as much of an impact because the other planets have also moved and so on. But it's a good, interesting exercise just to be aware of it and to see if there are tendencies for that to happen. Again, these dates are based on the sidereal zodiac and not the tropical zodiac. So if you're following Western astrology, then the dates would be different. And also these dates are based, I mean, I just went to the California time, Pacific time. So for people who are in different parts of the world, it could be plus minus 1 day from this, depending on where you are. So, okay. And one good thing about the Gandanta is that because it's 6 degrees total, and moon goes through 1 degree for every 2 hours. So we are talking about 12 hours. So the 12 hours of it basically, that's the time when it has the biggest impact. So after 12 hours, then again, it goes away. So it's just up and down, just like our minds sometimes. Okay, January 24th is the Moon Rahu conjunction. Now Rahu represents suddenness. Something can happen. It also represents kind of things that don't appear the way they are actually. I think it's important to know the story of Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean. Does everybody know that story, or if you do, then anyway, I think it might be important just to quickly go through it. So, very in the ancient days, there was this battle between the gods and the demons. Okay. Now, why do the gods and the demons exist? Because the creation is based on the pairs of opposites. So for everything, there's an opposite in creation. Why? Because without one, we would not recognize the other. If it was all good, we wouldn't know what good is. So we have to have both basically and then they lend beauty and emphasis on each other. So anyway, so that's a different topic. But basically, there was a battle between the gods and the demons, and the gods actually badly lost that battle. So, and sometimes the gods win, sometimes the demons win, and so on. So anyway, on this battle, the gods went to Vishnu and said, you got to do something about this. We can't lose like this to the demons, for the sake of the creation. So Vishnu agreed, and he said, okay, there is something that can be done, and it's the elixir of immortality, the Amrita. But in order for you to get the Amrita, and once you have that, you'll become immortal. But in order for you to do that, you have to churn the ocean. And once the ocean is churned, then you will get it will come out at the end. So the gods were wondering how they're going to do it. And actually, then he gave them an idea. Vishnu gave them, he said, why don't you have an agreement with the demons, and both of you and both sides can join hands together, because you cannot do it by yourself. They cannot do it. And basically churn. And then, you can get the Amrita that way. So anyway, the gods decide that was the only option that they had. So they do decide to have an agreement with the demons. And just to make a long story short, they use a mountain to churn the ocean, and then they used a rope, which was actually the king of the snakes or something, to churn the ocean. And then the gods and the demons were churning the ocean, and a lot of things came up. A lot of first of all, there were a lot of poisons that came out, and then they went to Shiva and to help them, because the poisons could destroy the world. So Shiva consumed the poisons to save the creation, and that's how he held those things on his throat, and that's why his throat turned blue, and which is why it was called as Nilakantha for Shiva. So after all these poison all became, and then the good things started coming out. I think it was the Kamadhenu, the full wish fulfilling cow came out, and I think also says Dhanvantri, who's the Ayurveda, that thing came out, and knowledge and a lot of treasures and diamonds and everything came out. But at the end, the Amrita comes out. So then Vishnu basically has the gods and the demons line up, and he says, okay, he's going to give the Amrita to them, and they will share it. So while Vishnu is giving the Amrita to the gods, and one of the demons realized that, this may be a trick that Vishnu is playing with us, and he may just finish the Amrita with the gods, and we will not be left with anything. So what he does is he disguises himself and comes and stands in the line of the gods. And Vishnu goes on giving, and he gives the Amrita to that demon also, who was disguised as a god. But just as that happens, the sun and the moon were standing on each side of this demon, and they recognized the demon. And then they told Vishnu, oh, actually, he's not a god, he's a demon. And Vishnu got angry. He took out his sword, and he basically cut the demon into two, the head and the body. Now, by that time, the demon had already had the Amrita, so the demon was immortal. So the head continued to live on, and the body continued to live on. So the head is the Rahu, is a planet. It's not a planet; it's basically a mathematical calculation, but it acts like a planet, and the body is Ketu. So because Sun and Moon were the ones who identified them, so that demon, the Rahu and Ketu, they always have not a good relationship with the sun and the moon, and they eclipse the sun and the moon every month. They go around. So whenever the moon comes together with Rahu, the mind is imprinted by those qualities of Rahu. Now, what were those qualities? So one was Rahu is super ambitious, as we saw in the story. It is also a planet. It can be a planet of deceit in some ways, where things don't appear as they are, but it's also a planet of intelligence. It was that demon was intelligent enough to become immortal, right? And also it is a planet of obsession too. So the moon takes on those kind of qualities, and when it's coming close to with Rahu, and especially if the moon is together with Rahu in our natal chart, then it imprints our mind with some of those qualities. I've seen the person tends to worry a lot, basically, or it can be obsessive about something. So that's how we recognize. And then Ketu did not have a head. So when the person comes into Ketu time, the person, I've seen that they do things that may be classified as headless or without direction. They don't know what's happening, and they're just going from one this thing to another. But they don't have a clear direction in life. Luckily, all these things are temporary. So once the Ketu phase is over, then the Venus phase comes, and things completely change, and so on. But this at least gives us some idea as to why we may be feeling some of the things that we do feel when we look at this relationship over here. So just to give you an example, when Moon Rahu was together, actually one of those days, a couple of years ago, I was staying at a place, and just before going to bed at night, I saw that during the night, because moon moves quickly, but during the night, I saw that moon will be conjunct Rahu. So I said, that's interesting. What's going to happen, right? So anyway, I go to sleep, and then I'm fast asleep. In the middle of the night, the fire alarm in the building goes on. Somebody had turned on the fire alarm. And so unpredictable, so unexpected, a sudden event. We all have to get down to the building. And then after a while, everything was fine, and we go back up and go back to sleep. But this is just an example of something unpredictable, unexpected happening. But then it passes by quickly also. Okay, January 25th, Mercury enters Aquarius. And January 28th, a few things, Sun-Jupiter conjunction. So that's a pretty positive conjunction. So Sun is the Atma, Jupiter is optimism, and so on, and knowledge, wisdom. So that's a good conjunction. That happens like once a year, because the Sun moves around the zodiac once every year. Moon is in Cancer. Now, what I've also seen is when Moon is in Cancer, the food kind of tastes good. If you're cooking something or wherever you go, the food would generally taste good, especially the first couple of days or so. So just an interesting thing to keep in mind. If you want to invite company over, and if you're looking for a date and you're going to cook something, then that might be a good day to go with. Venus enters Capricorn, joins Jupiter, Sun, Saturn, Capricorn. So quite a few planets in Capricorn. And we will talk about that in the next slide. And so again, January 29, Moon and Gandanta, Cancer to Leo. And then January 31st, Mercury goes retrograde. So you probably already know about Mercury retrograde, January 31st to February 21st, where things, communications get impacted and so on. I'm not going to spend much time on Mercury. Okay, February. I see we're already halfway there, so I'm going to pick up the speed here. So 5 planets in Capricorn, and then so there's a lot of Capricorn energy, and what does Capricorn stand for? Capricorn is basically a sign that's ruled by Saturn, and it is a hardworking sign. It takes responsibility seriously. It's dependable, but it has a frugal or economical way of spending, and there's a lot of hard work involved, and success comes later. So we will see some of those themes in our life and in the world, where basically the economy, we would have to be more more efficient in the use of our resources and our money and so on. We may have to do more with less, because that's what Capricorn is. So the economy will continue to have some challenges in this coming year, especially because of this so much emphasis on Capricorn. And then I know people may be thinking about the coronavirus as to what's going to happen over there. So my take is, so Saturn has got so many planets joining itself in Capricorn, and Saturn also represents separation, death, illness. And the other thing is Ketu, which we talked about, is in Scorpio, and Scorpio is the 8th house in the natural zodiac. And 8th house is the house of death, and Ketu actually also represents death. So the first half of the year, I think we are going to see that more often, but I think the second half of the year, as things change, as Jupiter goes into Aquarius, and as all these planets leave Capricorn also, I think things should get much better at that time. So so that's my take. Again, these are not actual, but these are tendencies that can play themselves out. So we saw 6 planets in Capricorn. Then we Moon, anything, okay, Moon, Rahu, Mars enters Taurus, joins Rahu. So that I will speak to that a little bit more. This conjunction of Mars on Taurus, which happens actually next month, but they are both in the same sign during this time. Then Moon in Cancer and Moon in Gandanta, which we talked about. In March, Moon conjunct Ketu. So just remember all those qualities. So that's on March 5th. So, and this thing is happening March 5th and 6th. Moon is in Gandhara. Moon is in challenging position on March 5th and 6th. So just to keep that in mind. March 17th, Venus enters Pisces. Now, this is it's exalted. It's a sign that Venus likes the most. And what does Venus represent? Love. It represents romance. It represents luxury. It represents different social activities and so on. So so those things can play out in a positive manner. So if you're looking to propose to somebody, or looking to marry somebody, or romance or whatever, then Venus in Pisces is a good thing. Now, Moon conjunct Mars and Rahu in Taurus, March 19th and 20th. So then we have to look at the qualities. So Mars represents, as I said, sudden. It represents anger, passion, fire. Rahu represents sudden things, unexpected things. Can represent secret things also. In fact, it does. And the Moon represents the mind. So all these things are coming together. So when Mars and Rahu are together, and especially when they conjunct exactly on March 26th, so maybe a week before or a week after also, to be just careful with things. There could be events that happen suddenly, not only at a global scale, but also in our day-to-day lives. So just to be careful when you're driving and so on, and to not get into any conflicts or anything with anybody as much as possible. March 31st, Mercury enters Pisces. It becomes, just as there's a sign of exaltation for each sign, there's also a sign of debilitation where the planet is not entirely comfortable. So it is in Pisces from March 31st to April 16th. So the decisions may not be as good as we may want to. So just double check everything before you decide on something. This is different than Mercury being retrograde, where you're not able to reach somebody and communications create problem and the computers and so on. But in this case, Mercury also represents intelligence, discrimination, and so on. So that may not be at the strongest when Mercury is in Pisces. April moon, okay. April 5th, Jupiter enters Aquarius, no longer debilitated. I think that's an important point because, and again, Jupiter and Saturn, these are slower moving planets. So when they change signs, they tend to have a bigger effect over the long term rather than, the moon that goes across. So it creates a lot of effects, but, it's temporary. But when these planets, when they change signs, the effect seems to be more long lasting. Now, why is this particular transit important? Because for the last year, Jupiter was in Capricorn, and Capricorn is its sign of debilitation. Now, what does Jupiter represent? It represents knowledge, wisdom. It represents Dharma. So the Dharma was at its lowest point. Okay, and we've seen that play out on this world front. That should start hopefully changing slowly after Jupiter goes into Aquarius. And the other thing is, the other important conjunction is, or the transit is Saturn and Capricorn, right? So we talked about that, but the implication of Saturn and Capricorn, or Saturn in its own sign, is that I think there will be a large scale social program that's going to be put in place around 2023, 2024, when Saturn will be in Aquarius. And why do I say that? It's because when Saturn comes in its own sign, there's like a social reset. Okay, there is the agenda becomes more progressive in nature. It's like the people who have been forgotten, Saturn takes care of those issues right now. So if and Saturn goes around the zodiac once every 30 years. So I actually went back and looked uh, when Saturn was in its own sign and what happened. So around 90 years ago, when Saturn was in Aquarius, that's when we had Social Security put in place. That was in 1935. And Saturn was in Aquarius. Then 30 years later, in 1965, Medicare was put in place, and Saturn was in Aquarius. 30 years later, around 94 or 9, it was the internet basically came and did a social reset where people, it didn't matter. I mean, when an individual could create a multinational company sitting from their own bedroom, and many of them actually did also. So there was a general reset, and things changed quite a bit since that the internet did, and for the better. And now we are at the same point where Saturn is its own sign. It's in Capricorn. It's not in Aquarius yet, but it's going to be in Aquarius 2023, 2024. So there could be a large-scale social program like Medicare for all, or universal basic income, or something along those lines. And that program is going to is going to be sustained over a long period of time, because whenever Saturn gives something, it first of all, it gives after a long time, but then it actually gives something that is more solid, has more of a solid foundation. So I feel like there would be the agenda would get more and more progressive, and I know there are elections happening today in Georgia for the Senate. So I think if the Senate doesn't flip to the Democrats today or tomorrow, it will in the next 2 years, because in order for a large-scale social program to be put in place, all the branches of the government would be democratic in nature. But that's the thing. Okay, did we cover? Okay, May, Moon conjunct Saturn and Capricorn. So that's something. Saturn represents responsibility. It also represents seriousness. It represents sadness, and sometimes. So just to be aware that Moon will conjunct Saturn on May 3rd. And that happens every month, by the way. So because it's conjuncting all the different planets, but I'm just highlighting the days over here, just so that we are aware of. May 4th, Venus enters Taurus. Again, it's a very happy Venus because Taurus is its own sign. So, and then on May 15th and 26th, there are 4 planets in Taurus. So Taurus represents, security. It represents stability, and represents love, comforts, and so on. So represent different cuisines, like and gardening also. So those things may come more into play. May 23rd, Saturn goes retrograde. Okay, now May 26th is a lunar eclipse in Taurus. So something to be aware of when eclipses happen, it can be unpredictable, as we have already seen some of those Rahu Ketu qualities. But things can come to a conclusion or can start something new around the eclipse. But it's best not to make some major decisions around the eclipse time. Now, when I go back and look at the coronavirus, it actually started around an eclipse in December 2019. The last week of December 2019, there was a big eclipse that happened in Sagittarius and Gemini. And so it started that off. And maybe this is the time when it starts going in the background, it starts receding, especially with Jupiter going into Aquarius and this eclipse. I think the first half of the year is something we still have to be careful of. And we may actually see the peak of it in January, February, maybe March also, based on so many planets in Capricorn. But then after that, it should start getting better. May 31st, Sun conjunct Rahu. Again, so we talked about Sun and Rahu. June. So an eclipse happens like, there's a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse. So the new moon is the solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse is the full moon. So that happens in Scorpio, Taurus, Scorpio. So sometimes, the new moon can lend itself to starting new things. Some things can start around that time. And the full moon, lunar eclipse, some things can end around that time. But yeah, so let's see. Venus enters Cancer with Mars there. Okay, Mars enters Cancer on June 2nd. So Cancer is the fourth house of the zodiac. It represents the home, it represents the family. And Mars represents anger, aggression, and so on. So there's just something to keep in mind if you're living in a family environment that Mars qualities can play themselves out while Mars is in Cancer. That's from June 2nd until July 20th. But then Venus also enters Cancer on June 22nd, so it can soften things up with Mars. So it can make things better also. And then finally, June 27th, Moon conjunct Saturn in Capricorn, and June 28th, Moon conjunct Jupiter in Aquarius. Okay, it's important to remember that each moment is important in each day. So we are creating new karma at new moment in every moment of our life through our thoughts, words, actions, and speech. Not just on the dates that the particular planet is moving into a sign and something eclipse is happening or anything like that. So, and actually, the karma that we are creating influences the effects that the planets have on our lives. Now, what I mean by that is that say we have a set of options that we have in our life, and we use our free will to choose one of those options. Now, once we make that choice, the next set of options that are presented is based on the choice that we've made in the previous set. If we had chosen a different set, if we had chosen a different option previously, a different set of options would present itself. So this is how the karma and destiny are playing themselves out. So we are influencing our destiny through our free will, okay, and based by what choices we are making. And these choices we are making all the time, not just on any days. So there's actually a interesting story that I could share, but I see that that was one of my personal insights, but I may just leave some time for questions instead. So this is my website, astrovedic108.com. So if you want, you can check it out. And if you have any questions that we don't answer today, you can send me an email over there. Okay. All right. So let's see if there are any questions.
Umesh, yes.
Yes. Okay.
There's a question from Jackie in Santa Cruz, California. Can you please speak to why at the bottom of the fasting calendar it talks about Mercury retrograde affecting communications, interpretations, manual skills, agreements, equipment? What does going direct and going retrograde mean?
Okay. So yeah, those areas that I mentioned over here, communications, interpretations, skills, agreements, and I will add business to it also. are those areas that are ruled by Mercury. And when Mercury goes direct, it basically impacts those areas. You will see that when you try to reach somebody, it's you get their voicemail or all the time, or in the time that we used to call, but not in. But even now that the computers don't, the internet connection doesn't happen. Eventually, it works itself out, but it's just that you have to try it a few different times before it happens. So it basically presents some challenges in the area of communications and those kind of things. Now, when it goes direct, it goes back to its own this thing. So then things start working fine.